Beetlejuice is a con man and infamous ghost who markets himself as a bio-exorcist. Where a normal exorcist would be hired by a human to remove a supernatural entity, he could be hired by the supernatural to remove humans. Before we get started, in order to avoid saying his name too many times, I'll just refer to him as Juiceman. Because of his status as a con man, we can't take the things he says about his past all that seriously when building his timeline. In fact, if you think about it, the things he says don't even match up. But I will still go over them in this video, and we can build the fake history of this character before getting into the real history seen in the summer of 1987. To learn what was fact and what was fiction, and what this character can teach us about the psychology of a liar, stick around to the end of this video. Come one, come all. It's showtime. Welcome to Horror History. Juiceman first appeared in the sort of self-titled 1988 movie directed by Tim Burton. Burton had directed his first feature, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, a few years prior, which was more of a kid-friendly adventure comedy. But I commonly see it on lists of the scariest scenes in kid-friendly movies thanks to what people call the Large Marge scene, where Pee-wee hitchhikes with a woman who tells the story of an accident that happened on that same day 10 years ago.
And when they finally pulled the driver's body from the twisted, burning wreck, it looked like this.
Which might be kind of scary if you're very young. After this, Burton was presented with a script for a horror comedy film, a ghost story told from the perspective of the ghosts. The script he was pitched was slightly darker and featured crude adult humor with gruesome death scenes, profanity, constant sexual references, and a titular character described as wiry and dark with cold yellow eyes. At one point, he shapeshifts into an agent of the IRS, shows Lydia his little friend, which turns out to be literally a small version of himself, and he becomes a rabid squirrel who attacks a young girl. The script was completely reworked by the time Tim Burton shot it, with the intensity toned down to the point of family-friendly and an added location, which was the realm of the Afterlife, containing several of the film's most iconic characters. The movie is rated PG, despite still containing a few sexual references and an F-bomb. PG-13 did exist back then, but somehow this one snuck by and was rated PG. The success of the movie opened the door for an animated spin-off series that ran from 1989 to 1991. There was a musical in 2018, and there's even a chain of bars and restaurants called Beetlejuice, which offers themed drinks, food, and entertainment. None of this supplemental material is considered canon though. The cartoon is more of an alternate universe where Juiceman and his victim, Lydia, are best friends for some reason. With that in mind, the first thing to work off of to understand Juice's potential past takes us back to the ancient Greek origin of the Juiceman's mythology. Very little is known about him, except that he is the ultimate con man in the afterlife. The spelling of his name on screen comes from a red supergiant star from the Orion constellation, who is named after the figure Orion from Greek mythology, a skilled hunter who was placed into the sky after his death to honor his legacy. Orion is first mentioned in Homer's The Iliad, the epic poem written around 700 BCE. If Juiceman was around at the same time as Orion in the story, this would make him incredibly ancient, but I don't necessarily believe that to be the case. However, it is possible that he was given the name because he's an amalgamation of other trickster characters in various cultural mythologies. For one, he possesses the ability to shapeshift to trick those around him, which he shares with Loki, the trickster from Norse mythology. He's also a compulsive liar, similar to Hermes, the inventor of lies in Greek mythology. Finally, he serves as a link between the dead and the living, much like Mercury, who is known as the trickster god and master of wit and deception in the ancient Roman mythology. What he shares with all of them is that he's a con man who's always trying to trick or take advantage of someone. However, he claims to be less of a god and more of a ghost who once walked the earth as a human.
I lived through the Black Plague and I had a pretty good time during that.
If this is the truth, I assume the fun he had during the Black Plague was swindling people, which is something that occurred during this time, with many fraud attempts to gain the inheritance of the deceased who had not had the time or an available official to make them a will. It wouldn't be that different from the way we see him select his targets and try to con them in the movie, or even the way he steals another customer's number in a waiting room. The Black Plague spanned from 1346 to 1353, meaning he would have been born in the 1300s CE. However, I don't think we can necessarily trust that he was around during the Black Plague, because he also claims to have attended Juilliard and Harvard, both prestigious American universities. Harvard University was founded in 1636 and Juilliard in 1905, meaning that he would have to have survived nearly another 600 years after the plague to have attended both. You could argue that when he said lived through these things, he's saying that he experienced them from the realm of the supernatural. To be fair, he does at one point claim that it's been 600 years since he's had any action, suggesting that maybe he did live during the plague. But I don't think that's the case. He specifically refers to himself as a dead guy, and we see that those who die are basically confined to the area that they're haunted. He couldn't have been to colleges in other states, so something doesn't add up. He also claims to have seen The Exorcist 167 times, but The Exorcist came out in 1973. Though for that one you could argue that he watched it in the afterlife, but given his other lies, I don't have much reason to believe him. So I'm gonna try to stick to the hard evidence when building his timeline. It's likely that he died around the 1930s because his replacement as Juno's assistant seems to be Miss Argentina, who looks to have died in 1939, though it is possible that there were multiple assistants. We know that he was married and divorced, or possibly widowed, because he's seen pulling out a finger with a wedding ring on it, planning to reuse that ring for another marriage. This may or may not be the finger of Dolores, his ex-wife set to be introduced in the sequel film. But it would be in the afterlife that this expert of deception became most infamous. At some point, Juiceman was an assistant to an afterlife caseworker named Juno, who helps the recently deceased if help is needed, deserved, and available. This is another hint that he is most likely human, seeing as how Juno and the other employees of the afterlife facility are also formerly human.
If I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have had my little accident.
This character, Miss Argentina, suggests that working here may be a punishment for a self-induced death, which is backed up with a rumor floating around the human worlds later.
You know what they say about people who commit suicide? In the afterlife, they become civil servants.
Which would suggest that this is also how Juiceman died. What we do know is that he caused a lot of trouble when he worked there, so he was fired, banished, and barred from physically interacting with anyone who did not summon him by saying his name 3 times. Unlike Candyman, Bloody Mary, and Biggie Smalls, this does not have to be in front of a mirror. He can be summoned from anywhere. He also cannot say any part of his own name. It's possible that he isn't allowed to spell any part of his own name either. When he airs a TV commercial trying to convince people to say his name, he spells it like the supergiant star that I mentioned earlier, which is different from the name of the movie, leading me to believe that maybe he does spell his name like this, but for the same reasons he's not allowed to say his name out loud, he's forced to spell it like this. To make matters more confusing, it's spelled like the star in the end credits. In the end, we just don't know for sure, which is probably the way he wants it. Before he's summoned, he's reduced down to a couple inches in size, rendering him relatively useless, so he spends all of his time trying to trick people into saying his name. And he gets a golden opportunity in May 1987, when Adam and Barbara Maitland are killed in a car crash. I'm assuming the date because we see an open calendar in the Maitlands' kitchen the day of their death. He notices their obituary in the Afterlife newspaper, where he also takes note of the front page story that sandworm attacks are up 13%. In June, the Dietz family moves into the Maitlands' house and plans a series of obnoxious renovations, so Juiceman plans to use their annoyance to his advantage. He makes a flyer and later a TV commercial where he plays the part of a cowboy, selling a service he calls Bio-exorcism, where he offers to do whatever it takes to get rid of any humans violating your home. Exactly what the Maitlands are looking for.
Now, which is thing you want me to eat? Now, swallow anything you want me to swallow. Come on down now. Chew on the dog.
If you can't understand him, he's saying, I'll eat anything you want me to eat, swallow anything you want me to swallow, so come on down, I'll chew on the dog. Which just shows that he's desperate for someone to summon him. But perhaps the more important detail is that this commercial is filmed from a model-sized version of the town, Winter River, Connecticut, that the Maitlands have in their attic. We can see the spongy grass and this tiny cow. In fact, he's only ever seen at the Maitlands house and at the Afterlife caseworker offices, suggesting that like Adam and Barbara, he too was a human who lived and died on this property. The difference being that they want to stay and live there in peace, but he wants out. And he sees his ticket shortly after, when the Maitlands go to consult their caseworker and the teenage girl, Lydia Dietz, discovers the attic with the model town, which is probably when Juiceman first notices her. There's allegedly a loophole of sorts in the handbook for the recently deceased, which allows the dead to cross back into the realm of the living by marrying a living human being, which by his description seems to grant him a visa to the living world, kind of like how a green card marriage can grant a person citizenship into a country. Of course, we've got to take this all with a grain of salt. It's possible that this was another con and he had other reasons for wanting to marry her, but I tend to believe his reasoning was legitimate based on how desperate he is to make it happen. Time passes more quickly in the world of the dead, so when the Maitlands return from their visit with the caseworker, it's been about 3 months. During this time, he continues living with his own little grave inside the model town and baits a housefly with a candy bar and eats it. He continues to observe Adam and Barbara's failed attempts at scaring away the Dietz family until finally they're at their wits' end and notice him flashing lights near the graveyard of the model town using his neon sign. Barbara decides to utter the name 3 times, which shrinks them down into the model to meet him face to face for the first time, but only after digging him out of the coffin they've placed there, which I think is mostly just for show. After arriving, he's just a creep from the moment they meet, assaulting Barbara with an unwanted kiss, groping her, and many other things that the Maitlands find offensive. But he does have the quality they've been missing up to this point.
Can you be scary?
Can it be scary? What do you think of this?
The Maitlands decide not to employ him, with Barbara citing that she doesn't want to expose Lydia to that pervert. They make one more attempt to scare off the Dietzes by possessing their family and dinner guests, making them dance to Henry Belafonte's The Banana Boat song, and turning their shrimp cocktails into frightening hands that knock them out of their seats. However, the plan backfires, and the Dietzes become even more interested in the house, thinking they can monetize their haunting and turn a profit. They send their daughter Lydia, the only one who can communicate with the spirits due to her being strange and unusual, and Juiceman chooses this as the time to strike. He turns from a handrail into a giant snake, which for some reason scares them a lot more than the shrimp hands, even though I think it looks pretty silly.
We come for your daughter, Chuck.
He corners Lydia, but luckily for her, Barbara quickly recites his name, sending him back to his miniature town in a rage, where he again expresses his interest in Lydia, referring to her as Edgar Allan Poe's daughter. Barbara tries to tell him off, but he emits spikes all over his body, causing her to drop him, but before he can do any more damage, he's distracted by a brothel that randomly appears there, which turns out to be a distraction placed by Juno, the caseworker, who concludes that Adam and Barbara need to get rid of the family on their own before he can do any more damage. But when Lydia wanders up to the attic to talk things out with them, she instead finds the self-proclaimed ghost with the most, and he attempts to reach a deal with her. Due to some mix of loneliness, shame about her family, and probably teenage hormones, Lydia Dietz has decided that she'd like to leave the realm of the living and join Adam and Barbara in the afterlife. But when she goes up into the attic, she finds someone else waiting for her instead, and he immediately begins trying to trick her, making up a story about some friends he has to meet in the world of the living and requesting her help to get out. Again, if even a single thing he said about his past so far was true, it would be impossible for him to still have living friends. But when Lydia reveals that she actually wants to go the other way and take up residence in the afterlife, it genuinely perplexes him for a brief second.
I don't want to get in.
Why?
Promising Lydia that if she lets him out, he could take her to the other side to find Adam and Barbara, he convinces her to play a game of charades so she can say his name 3 times and free him. But before saying the third repetition, she makes the connection, recognizing him as the snake that attacked her, and she hesitates. The Maitlands get back and stop her from falling for his trick, but there's more trouble in the air downstairs. Otho, the family's interior decorator with an interest in the paranormal, has stolen the handbook for the recently deceased, and they're using it to perform a seance, looking to summon Adam and Barbara. This causes the couple to disappear from the afterlife and materialize in their old clothes, where they quickly start to decompose. Worried that her new friends will be lost forever, Lydia has only one figure she can turn to, and runs upstairs to find him. This is where he gives her an ultimatum. The only way he'll help is if she agrees to marry him, so Lydia reluctantly agrees.
It's showtime.
As we saw a brief glimpse of before, Juiceman's presence creates chaos, and he enjoys himself while holding a sort of mirror up to everyone's vanity. He rises from the model town dressed as a carnival attraction, and refers to the city as a museum of natural greed, before smashing 2 of the family's guests through the ceiling in a human-sized game of high striker. This is his method of commentary on their exploiting the dead for their personal amusement and financial gain. We never see these characters again, so we can only assume that this killed them, and they are now in the 2-month waiting period before they materialize as ghosts. But this actually ties into my own theory about what Juice was like in life. I think he was probably an actual carny. For those outside of North America, you may know carnies by a different name like showy or showman. But basically, we're talking about an operator at a carnival. While carnivals themselves are a pretty ancient tradition, the oldest carnival game is believed to be hoopla, the one where you try to throw a ring around a bottle, which allegedly dates back to ancient Greece, just like Juiceman's real name. But he probably would have worked at the high striker game in particular. For one, we know that his replacement, Miss Argentina, most likely died in 1939, which means that Juice himself would have died and started working there in the late 1930s. We also know that he's an infamous trickster, which is exactly how these carnies made their money. In particular, there was a scam that went around in the 1930s on high striker games. This 1935 article from Popular Mechanics magazine tells about how carnival operators could fix the machine using a secret lever that slightly reduces the tension of the wire that the block rides on, making it impossible to win, and causing countless macho men to empty their wallets trying to prove to their girlfriends that they're stronger than the small carny that they'd seen ring the bell. So couple that with the way he dresses, his unwashed hair, his theatrical behavior like in his commercial, and his amusement at seeing people suffer, and you've got a stereotypical carny. Surprisingly, Juiceman does stay true to his word and releases the Maitlands from their seance with his powers, probably thinking that he'll somehow be able to use them later.
Well, we got the Maitlands. I think they've had enough exercise for tonight.
He replaces Otho's suit with a blue leisure suit, probably a knock on his interior decorating and overall fashion taste, and he traps Lydia's parents using the mom's own sculptures so that he can proceed with the wedding. He brings out this weird little alien guy to officiate, and as you'd expect, everything is fixed. He prevents the wedding official from saying his name.
Do you, Beetle?
Nobody says the B word, come on.
And doesn't allow Lydia to have her own say in the matter.
And you, do you, Lydia, take this man to be...
She's a little bit nervous. Maybe I should answer for her, okay?
He dodges every attempt by the couple to revoke his powers by saying his name, popping out Adam's teeth, shrinking him down to model size, zippering Barbara's mouth shut, welding it shut, and sending her to Saturn, which eventually works against him when she tames one of the hostile sandworms and uses it to attack him and save their new surrogate teenage daughter from a life of disgusting matrimony. This seems to be enough to do him in, and he's next seen back at the Afterlife waiting room, almost as if he's died again and being forced to go back through the process with a new caseworker. It seems that his behavior hasn't changed, however. He gets smacked for feeling up a detached pair of legs, and when he tries to cut in line by stealing a voodoo priest's call number, he gets his head shrunk. I found it noteworthy that we see that nothing has really changed for him in the end, because it lines up with the common sentiment that liars never change. In order to look further into this, I'll first need to determine what kind of liar he is. But in trying to do that, I ran into one big problem. Depending on who you ask, there are many different types of liars, but the main two are pathological liars and compulsive liars. However, during my research, I found that some sources make out compulsive and pathological lying to be the same thing, while others highlight the key differences between the two. However, neither is a medically recognized condition according to DSM-5, the international standard used by mental health professionals. Both compulsive liars and pathological liars are merely symptoms of other conditions, like antisocial personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder. The best explanation I could find was this medically reviewed article from Everyday Health. The word pathological refers to the study of disease, so some psychologists define pathological lying as excessive lying for 6 months or longer that's causing marked distress for the individual and an impairment in functioning, basically likening it to a mental disease. A modern example is the entertainer and lolcow Boogie2988, who has a long history of lies designed to benefit him, most recently lying about having cancer in order to get people to donate, and being blasted by his peers when he refused to show proof. He eventually got so deep into the lie that he agreed to tattoo his face if he was not telling the truth, and lo and behold, here's the tattoo. So that's textbook pathological lying. Compulsive lying is, like other compulsive disorders, something done to relieve anxiety in the moment. The article gives an example. Someone asks you about your favorite band, and you feel anxious about giving the right socially acceptable answer. You respond with some lie to resolve that anxiety, and in the moment there's some relief, but then later on you feel remorse or regret about the lie. It's less about crafting a narrative and more of a quick way to relieve stress. For that reason, compulsive lying is often a feature of pathological lying, but that isn't always the case. There's just a lot of overlap between the two. This is what gave me my answer about Juiceman. He exhibits features of both. His pathological lying, like pretending to be a bio-exorcist or making up Lydia's wedding vows, are designed for him to personally gain something, part of a long-term con, but they create distress for him. He gets banished from the Afterlife offices and frequently blows up relationships. But he also lies compulsively, like claiming he attended Harvard or claiming he's got a GQ photo shoot coming up. Little things that make him look cool but can easily be disproven. There's no medical consensus on the reason that pathological liars develop their habits, but some believe that tension in early childhood may cause a person to lie to avoid conflict, and that coping mechanism carries over into adult life. Others believe that it may be genetic. In the case of the Juice, his lies are the reason that we don't know much about his childhood, so it's hard to say if either could apply to him. For obvious reasons, both pathological liars and compulsive liars tend to have issues in relationships, and this is very much the case for him, which is obviously the reason he needs to force Lydia into marriage with him rather than going the honest route. It's interesting how in this movie, Juiceman is a dead person with the desire to forcibly marry the living and join their world. But later on in Tim Burton's career, he would direct The Corpse Bride, where a living character accidentally marries the dead while practicing his vows near a grave, and goes the opposite direction, forced to join the world of the dead. He has at least one ex-wife, and it looks like he'll soon be going to war with her or another in the events of the upcoming sequel, Beetlejuice. Oh, damn it! Remember to subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week, ring the death bell for all notifications, and I will see you in the next one. Assuming we both survive.